Hey there, it's John here from the Red Dice Diaries. Just listening to your Cannon Fodder Henchmen episode. Very much enjoyed it. And I thought, yep, highlighting the loyalty value is a very important thing, particularly in a dungeon. But I also quite liked the comparison you made with a unit of soldiers or troops on the battlefield, which was something I'd not considered before. Like yourself, I'm a big fan of turning over much of the sort of admin and running of henchmen to the player characters and letting them do that bit. Obviously, as a GM, I retain the right to sort of veto anything like that. Like if they say, oh, this henchman's going to go and do this, I can always call for a loyalty check or say, no, he isn't. And I tend to role play them in sort of conversational settings. But I don't see a reason not to turn everything else over to the players. Anyway, very much enjoyed the episode. Keep up the good work, and I'll catch you soon.
Oh yeah, outsource it as much as you can. That's actually ties into a conversation I was having on Discord recently about how to handle large numbers of troops. And one of the things I had done is, in a lot of my chainmail experiences, I had been treating individual units as individuals. So two squads crash into each other, it's 20 on 20, there's 10 in the front rank, so to speak, so you're not rolling too many dice at any given time. But then in a game I played, we treated a big old unit as just this big old unit because to avoid differential problems in the line. So that is, if the guy second, there was a collapse on the northern side versus on the southern side. I didn't want to do the math on it, but anyway, so one of the other dudes at the table suggested that you scale it. So instead of rolling 96 dice, which I absolutely rolled 96 dice, I played orcs in Warhammer, so I'm accustomed to having my 72 bucket multiple times and trying to count successes. Didn't seem out of the ordinary. But he pointed out, instead of rolling 96 dice, what you could do is scale it. So instead of counting the individual men in the line and rolling them together, you would count figures. So maybe scale it, instead of counting the 2 to 1 out of a unit of 36 or whatever it was, you just divide it down. And so instead of rolling 96 dice, I was rolling 6. And if so on average, we would get that 1 and we would kill 20 dudes. And so it didn't sit right with me because I wanted that granularity, but I thought about it. Rolling 6 dice is a lot faster to count successes, and the odds aren't really that different. So when you say 1 casualty in the figure scale, that's 20 casualties. So out of those 96, did I get 20 sixes versus out of the 6, did I get 1? So scaling is one thing, outsourcing administration is another thing. If you can keep the burden of administration off of the ref, then you can focus on the presentation of the game. And I honestly think that that's a good habit that you're describing there, because by focusing on the experience, by focusing on your NPCs, by focusing on the game, instead of micromanaging all of those numbers, you're able to do it better. So you spread out the work, like multiple processes going through multiple cores. And so that's always a good plan. So John Allen Large, thank you for calling in, and thank you for spreading the good word that is giving the player a little more autonomy there.
Here, I was listening to your episode on the OSR, the Donner Party. That did not go in the direction I thought it was going to, and I'm kind of glad it didn't, considering the Donner Party. But it got me wondering, I wonder how many both OSR style players and non-OSR style players really are looking for that style of mass combat war game that goes along with some of the domain play that gets in, that you get into the upper levels, and that some people started including from the beginning. And if that's not one of the things that both the OSR and role-playing in general have kind of gotten away from. And then that got me thinking on a tangent, I wonder if the adventure party style play of D&D is one of the things that helped kick off the high prevalence of skirmish style war games that we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years, about the time D&D got really, really popular.
It played a role, no question. I mean, look at Games Workshop. One of the things that Games Workshop did very early on was publish D&D content, and then they came along with Warhammer and all of the franchise stuff with Warhammer, and yeah, that took off. And Games Workshop is still bumper crop, so to speak. They're doing very well for themselves. And regarding mass combat and skirmish combat, there's a big market for it. Like, you look at so there's been a recent video that's rolling around on the internets talking about mass combat and the new Dragonlance supplement for the 5th edition game, introducing elements of mass combat that you can do in your 5th edition game. So I do think there's a market out there. If there wasn't, then WotC wouldn't be trying to capitalize on it. And that's how I was introduced to the game. I went to the hobby shop where we were playing Warhammer, where we were playing Mordheim. Mordheim is the Warhammer equivalent of the skirmish, because Warhammer started as a skirmish game, but then they learned that if they sold you more dudes, then they would make more money. So it became a giant kind of army thing. But the Mordheim, you have character advancement. It's a little randomized, but your heroes will get better over time based on how many they survive, how much treasure they get. And so there's this real OSR element to Mordheim that it does not bear mechanical compatibility with the role-playing type game that D&D turned into, but it has the same spirit in terms of the domain tier and warband tier game. And so yes, I think there's absolutely an influence from D&D to get into, and chainmail to kick it off, that by introducing fantastic or science fiction elements to historical gaming, then you now invite the fantasy and science fiction enthusiasts. So before we had fantasy wargaming, we had historical wargaming. You have Napoleonic wargaming, medieval wargaming, and there's a lot of history buffs get into that. And so you can see this in more modern vintage with the Flames of War line, where I had friends who got really into Flames of War, and they built their own unit. Military veterans found the unit that corresponded to the unit they served in, and they built it. And so they knew the people that they were painting. And then, so you have this historical fascination in a lot of those games. And in the historical versions, you have this fascination with not verisimilitude. You have this fascination with being true to life, and that can be off-putting when you're trying to be creative, because it's hard to say you can invent your own units, but you're playing within the lines, so to speak. And it's by opening up the fantasy world, by opening up those kind of avenues of opportunity, you can spread more stuff. Like there are organ guns in Warhammer Fantasy that didn't exist in real life, and so because you're able to create more fantastic minis to paint, more interesting combinations to field on the tables. So yeah, absolutely, the divorce of historical gaming from history definitely opened up the marketplace. And I don't know if it was just a 90s thing or but there was a lot of focus on individual character development and storytelling, and that's been one of the big things that people complain about in new school gaming to the present day, is that you have this focus on the characters instead of the party and instead of the campaign. And so as we rediscover the roots of the hobby, the domain tier gaming was part of it. You have the necessity to purchase a wagon train and retainers in a stronghold to store the treasure that you had to acquire in order to level up, and it very rapidly becomes a excuse me. The old school editions are written in such a way that it almost funnels you into creating a warband, creating a domain, creating a stronghold, all that in-game stuff. And that's something that's missing from a lot of the new school games, that because products are coming out that cater to it, a lot of people who enjoy that, a lot of people who are drawn to that are coming into the hobby, either out of having played more character-driven games, or from outside the hobby entirely, and we're coming into it because it's, hey, war games. So people coming into 5th edition the same way that I came into 2nd or 3rd. But anyway, the fun call. Good to hear your voice, sir. Thank you for calling in.
Hey Taylor, Jason here. So I have joined a game picking up a henchman. I've also been a player in a game where my PC died and then took over henchman. And then the henchman died and took over another henchman.
I am reminded of running a DCC funnel to start off a campaign. One of my more impetuous players burned through so many of his individuals that he borrowed one. He had to borrow one from one of the other players. We started with 4 dudes apiece. He killed 5. And so he managed to die 5 times.
This is a game where Spencer, or free throw over Keep Off the Borderlands, shot my thief with 1 hit point in the back. Not intentionally, but he rolled a 1 and ended up shooting me in the back. And then I took over henchman. Like I say, henchman died, and I took over another one, and that one survived. But I think the key to henchmen and hirelings is the GM plays them. You don't give them to players and let players do what they want with them. The players can say, I want you to do this or this, but the GM ultimately should be controlling those characters. Now, in combat, if it's easier for the GM to let the players control them and roll them during combat, that's fine, but you need to do what you said and take the morale in effect, and the GM can always override. If the player has them do something stupid, the GM can always say, no, they're not going to do that. But out of combat, the GM or DM should 100% be controlling those henchmen and hirelings. The players shouldn't use them as puppets. As long as you're doing that, I don't think there's going to be a big problem here. Give them personalities, distinct personalities, and role play them. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing, right? This isn't about just fantasy adventuring and moving board game pieces. This is about talking to funny voices.
Knight to C9. Okay, now move up the Cavalier to flank.
Okay, maybe I went a little bit too far, but you know what I'm talking about.
The biggest key there, I think, is ease of referee. If a particular course of action would make the game flow more smoothly because you offload some of the processing that the ref has to do, that's generally something worth thinking about. Now, yeah, absolutely, you got to keep morale in mind, you got to keep loyalty in mind, and you got to remember that the NPCs aren't just cardboard cutouts, they're living, breathing, fake people that have their own fake goals, imaginary desires, and fears, etc. And so you got to take all that into account and consider some of the rules that were put in place and to take them into account. But by letting the players largely control them, it's similar to how a caller works. So effectively, the player controlling the hirelings becomes the caller for those hirelings in the same way that a caller for the party would be a caller for the player group. The regular role that a caller actually does. So it's at the end of the day, for me, I tend to like to let them largely tell me what the hireling is doing. They hired them after all, and the hirelings, they're paying them. But at the same time, and the bigger secret reason is because I'm running a single core, so I don't know if if I can offload some of that onto a parallel processor. It spares some of my ability. It lets me try to focus more on keeping the game moving and keeping the scene interesting. So thanks for calling in. Fun observation, fun thing to think about.
Hey Taylor, Daniel from Bandit. Keep calling in about the hirelings. Yeah, I think you really nailed it there. Of course, maybe it's because we both are looking at chainmail quite a bit. Yeah, you've got to treat the hirelings correct, use them correctly, I guess is the way I would say it, and treat them well, and then they will be more loyal. I mean, it's as simple as that. And yeah, right now in my OD&D campaign, they have they finally hired 2 more like fighter types. For a while, they wouldn't because the way I run the rules is that all the characters are considered heroes, so they go down last in any combat. So when you get into a combat, the player characters
They lost a lot of henchmen at the beginning. Let me just say that, and they felt bad about it. They were like, "Oh man, our henchmen keep dying."
I have a similar situation. My players are often hesitant to bring henchmen and hirelings in, not for the same reason, though. They have no qualms about them dying left and right, but they don't like that I ask them to pay in shares. But that's another story.
But I allow them to hire like pack bearers and stuff that just stay back. So they've got a bunch of those, and that's mostly what they have now. But they've rescued people. I've had straight up, meet them in a tavern, kind of put a sign out. I use those rules, to see who they find with the loyalty, like you said. But then they've also encountered people just through role play where they've rescued people or those kind of things who have joined the group. And they even for a while had a couple of werebores that joined the party. They were they treated them well and they were looking for adventure. And one of them finally died in a combat, so I decided because they were a mated pair that the other one would no longer want to adventure. They just took their share and left. But it's been pretty fun, and I definitely think you're 100% right. While I let the characters or the players give a little bit of control over them, they're like the bosses or the generals or whatever you want to say. In the end, you got to treat the hirelings like they're real people. It will make a more fun play session because the players will start to think of them like that and not just as beat shields. I've never really liked that term, to be honest with you.
Neither have I, the term meat shield, but you already knew that because I did the episode on it. That's neat hearing about the lycanthropes joining the group temporarily. I've had parties run into other... Oh, I hear. I'm watching the other child for this recording. Mem. Yeah, random encounter. But yeah, having those relationships form with NPCs or even monsters, that's one of the very cool things about reaction roles. That's one of the very cool things about using alignment languages. It's this big facet of the game that you get in old school gaming versus the more newer school, 3E onward, where your primary XP source is from combats, which of course motivates you to fight. So anyway, there's a thought. You heard me, listeners. If you enjoy mixed parties or more than just combats in your dungeons, there you go. Play old school. Thank you so much for calling in.
Hey there, it's John here from the Red Dice Diaries. Just listening to your Forget the Game Balance article for OSR October. Very much enjoying it. I think you make some good points. And as you say, when you're talking about the wilderness is as the wilderness is, which I agree with, it's not like the player party, if they've got any common sense, can't ask around the locals or use other methods of trying to find out a bit about the wilderness before they go there to decide, like, oh, is this place a bit too hot to handle? Like, if you go to the local tavern and they're like, oh, there's an ancient swamp witch and a dragon who lurks in the swamps and the fens beyond this village, and you're like really low level, you might think, yeah, maybe we'll leave that till a higher level. But that doesn't mean those things shouldn't be there just because you're low level. I absolutely agree. Anyway, I'm going to go back to listening to the rest of the episode. Keep up the good work, and I'll catch you soon.
And that then gives you the opportunity to use my rule of thirds post. That is, some of the stuff that the locals believe will be true, some of it will be partially true, and some of it may be rumor. More seriously, though, that's an absolutely quintessential element of player skill, is figuring out who to talk to, who to believe, and who to hire. So while there will be elements of perma-wilderness, there will be places that a party may go where no man has trod, at least in this generation. But especially at the lower levels, that's all part of prep. Figuring it out, getting the information that you can get prior to committing resources towards that exploration. So great observation, and something I don't know if I touched on in the episode. Probably didn't. Those October episodes are a little shorter than usual, but great point, and possibly an idea worth its own episode. Who knows? But thank you for calling, John.
Hey, Taylor. Yep, game balance. You have to be smart enough to run away when it's time to run away. So I have run away. this was in a game of the Black Hack, which honestly, if I was going to introduce new players to a dungeon kind of game, ICRPG or the Black Hack would probably be the way I go instead of any of the OSR games. But although people could say Black Hack is OSR in spirit, you can play it OSR. We definitely played it if you go with the OSR mindset, but if you go by OSR as game systems, it doesn't count. Anyway, this is a game of the Black Hack, and we were 3rd or 4th level, but we came up against a wereshark. And it was, we weren't that high level. We were like 2nd level, and it was like 4th level. So we had negatives to all of our attacks and all the stuff against it, and it was just kicking our butt. And so we were, we're like, screw this. We got to get out of here, and the water's rising, and, the caves are filling up with water and all this stuff. And Joe Richter was in that game, and he was playing a paladin, and he's I'm going to sacrifice myself. You guys go. And so my thief ran. Actually, I ended up, because the rest of the party didn't want to abandon him, so they all kind of were hanging out there waiting, trying to help. And I'm like, you know what? That doesn't make any sense. My thief has the goal. We went in there to get a certain treasure, and we got it. So my thief has this treasure in his backpack. We're being attacked by this super powerful creature. The caves are filled with water. Would he really stay? I actually did a die roll to see. In my heart, I didn't feel he would stay, but I figured, that's kind of I don't want to abandon my party. But do the die roll. He, determined he ran, so, which made sense for the character. So he ran. And yeah, Joe ended up getting bit by the wereshark. They ended up finally defeating the wereshark. The dice were with him that day, but it was kind of an embarrassment for my character from then on. He kind of sulked out of the game after that, and we had this plan. He was going to re-enter the game, and then life got in the way, and I didn't get to play for a while. So I ended up, when I came back in the game, I played a different character. But so yes, I have run away in a game that's at least OSR in spirit, the Black Hack. That's arguably an easier game, a better introduction game than any of the TSR clones.
It's what your character would do, right? But more seriously, that reminds me of a player that I had for a long, long time. Talking about disappearing and changing characters. So a friend of mine made a character that was secretly evil, and so he had this kind of a plan to betray the party at some point, and he was going to do this, that, and the other, and then his character, it just didn't fit well with the party. So what we ended up doing was we created this secondary, I did this, I was the ref, but we created a secondary kind of character for him, that more of an archer, because I knew he enjoyed sniper type characters. So we created a ranged combatant with special ranged abilities, and he liked that, and so he ended up dumping the old evil character after having separated from the party, planning revenge, and I was going to bring it back as an antagonist, blah blah. Then I never did, but that's okay, because he played this archer character and he had a blast playing the archer character with a secondary dude. Fast forward, he ended up going out of country for a while, for a couple months, and so his character got carried away by not demons, but his character got grabbed by subterranean spider creatures, and because we didn't know how long he was going to be gone, and so the plan was they would uncover some hints as to how to get his character back and have an adventure out of it. But then he didn't come back, and then we just kind of forgot about it. And then months later he came back, and so we spun up a third character for him, and he just rolled in that way. So that player, despite having suffered 0 PC fatalities, went through 3 separate characters over the course of the campaign. So and that was so fun little anecdote and little inspiration there from you. So in terms of disappearing with the treasure, if it was like a quest, so you were actively trying to rescue a MacGuffin, while I could see that there was that it might have been awkward having defeated the wereshark, and the party's like, where were you, bro? Yeah, well, at the same time, the MacGuffin got out, didn't it? Or if it was, we're here for the gold, then I'd be kind of surprised if the thief didn't just hightail it. Have the DM bring him up as an NPC later, or get kidnapped by underground spider demon creatures. So whichever works for the table.
As far as balanced encounters, I tend to agree with you. I mean, that's why you have levels of the dungeon in the old game, right? Because the deeper you get, the more dangerous it gets.
And how much treasure to expect.
That doesn't mean there's not a second or third level monster that snuck onto the first level of the dungeon, right? But you generally know roughly about how dangerous it is, depending what level of dungeon you're in, which is a balancing mechanism. I mean, like you say, there are balancing mechanisms in the... You go to BX, it talks about balanced encounters a little bit in there. But nothing to where you're doing math to balance encounters. Perfectly balanced encounters, or trying to make a perfectly balanced encounter, is an exercise in futility, and it cheapens the world. The world should be dangerous. There should be things you have to run away from. No question about it. So I think you and I are about on the same sheet of music as far as balanced encounters go.
Also, it doubles back to prep being the enemy of play. If you're doing calculus to come up with encounters and trying to figure out rest points and making sure that the party has a fair shot, that is a boatload of work. I mean, good night. My initial experiences trying to design dungeons in college were expected to conform to 3rd edition's CR-EL rating, and that was some weird math. The point being, it's so much easier just to roll it and go and just expect the players to figure it out. And the numbers make sense, because you look at 300 bandits in the wilderness, that makes sense. People would congregate like that. In order to survive in the wilderness as a level 0 bandit, you have to have 300 of you. And how else are you going to spend your ill-gotten gains? You got to fence somewhere, you got to feed somewhere. And so it makes sense. The numbers work out. And again, you can build out, and I think in another call that you had, Jason, I'm not sure whether this segment will come before or after, but you mentioned the Gygax expecting you to have 3 levels of dungeon ready to go before you have a player touch it. That's a lot easier to do if you're not doing a boatload of math. And honestly, having perfectly balanced encounters and rest zones, well, I'll backtrack a little bit there. Having the perfectly balanced encounters prevents you from being able to do deep dungeons, because you can only have so many encounters before you have to rest. So you either have to go back to town and either assume that the cleared zones stay clear, which is breaking my verisimilitude. Why would I just leave my front door unlocked when my guards are dead next to it? But you could also put in safe zones in the middle of the dungeon. Now, why would you do that? That's silly. That's a video game save point. That's not. If I want to play a video game, I'll play a video game. This doesn't jive for me. Now, if the party brings in their little cadre and makes themselves a save point, so I have a wagon train at the base of at the entry to the dungeon, and then I have stopping points that I have guys maintaining between, and we're keeping the peace. That's different. That's setting up your own lair. You almost become the 3 to 300 bandits, with the exception that you're of adventurer alignment. But anyway, the moral of the story, and where I was going with this ramble, is that not only does it break the verisimilitude, but it also makes it take significantly longer to create adventures, resulting in shorter, less fulfilling adventures. And who knows, maybe that's part of the reason why the modern campaign doesn't last more than 6 sessions.
And that wraps up another episode of the Clerics Wear Ringmail podcast, an independently operated product released for educational and informative purposes under the You Can Totally Steal This license. As always, sound effects are from Mixkit.co, used under the Mixkit royalty-free license. Segments recorded in a vehicle are recorded using a Bluetooth hands-free device, and Clerics Wear Ringmail assumes no liability in the consumption or distribution of the podcast. By listening, all parties agree. Any parties with questions can reach out on the Clericsware Ringmail blog, and parties who are dissatisfied can go suck an egg. Thank you for listening, everybody, and delve on.